Fove did not join me for coffee that night. I smelled the stuff when it was made, but when I finished my briefing it was late. I did most of it from the comfort and privacy of my room. The crew had all kinds of questions. Some of them were good ones, some were silly to my ears. But Bonnie seemed good enough at keeping them focused that I got through it. When I was finally done, I went upstairs and found the table empty. The chair was pulled out where Fove had sat, but it was empty. I knew she'd been there recently because while her parents are good about pushing their chairs back underneath the table, Fove is terrible about it. Therefore, she was here after everybody went to bed. I found a space for me, nonetheless. A cup of coffee in the mug she gave me, prepared the way I like it, and a little note scrawled on some scratch paper torn away from something. Good luck, and don't worry. The note read, she didn't sign it, but then again by now? By now she didn't need to. I sat at the table alone and drank in the quiet. Not many humans seem to appreciate the silence and tranquility of time alone. They're a furtive, busy people, always go, go, go. As a species, they tend not to idle well. Exceptions exist, like Fove, William, and Rebecca. But for the most part, from what I've seen, they seldom spend even 20 minutes alone with their own thoughts. Both the Lisas I met struck me that way, eagerly in search of company, people, and stimulation. I could call them friends in my way, but could never understand that part of them. As I sipped the warm, dark liquid, I thought of everything that had happened to bring me to this moment, not just in the last few weeks. No, I sat listening to the burbling coffee pot as it finished brewing more. I must have just missed Fove by minutes, I suppose. I thought about the generations that brought us here. One wrong move by an ancestor, and I would not exist. What if Fove's parents hadn't made just the right choices to meet, fall in love, and mate? What if instead of making her, they'd been arguing that night? A different person might be upstairs now. Maybe a boy that Wolfbeard had no interest in. The wars and conflicts and travels, the trials and struggles of eons of time in a universe so vast and large that Fove and I should never have met. No, not even our species should have encountered one another. Yet here we were. Dlamisa do not believe in destiny, only in the inevitability of improbability, that in the vast realm of possibilities, however remote if something must happen, through physics or chemistry or matter in motion. Some improbabilities, a vast string of them, become inevitabilities. That meant things that could go right, go wrong, and mean the whole damn world to one foolish and sometimes cowardly doctoral student on an alien planet. I finished my cup and set it down on the glass saucer and picked up the note. The light in the empty kitchen was dim, but the room at least was warm. It felt like minutes of sitting, thinking, fidgeting, and trying to mentally prepare myself for the next day. I checked my datapad and saw messages from both Lisa and Coach Wills. My finger tapped on first one, then the other with such excitement that I actually read neither of them. I only typed a response. Any help you can provide is fine, I would be very grateful. For all I knew, they'd said no to my request. I could have reopened their messages. I could have reread. No, I could have read them, I should say. But that anxiety about what lay ahead was such that I couldn't make my finger tap it twice. On an intellectual reasoning level, I knew that not knowing what they said would not change what they said, but as long as I didn't know, at least I had hope it wasn't a negative. Foolish? Yes. Unbecoming of a Dlamisa, let alone an academic, to embrace ignorance out of fear rather than knowledge. Whatever it was? Absolutely. But at that moment, at least, I just couldn't help myself. So I put it off. I took my cup to the sink and placed it next to Fove's. Then before going downstairs, I stopped. I went to the note on the table after a hesitant moment, picked it up, and took it with me back to my room. I set it on my shelf with the balloon animal I'd been given the day of my arrest, and lay down to sleep. I stared into the darkness when the lights were off, over to the place where my things sat, and remained still until sleep claimed me at last. I awoke with a start several hours later. My alarm was going off and probably had been for at least a little while. It was 9 a.m, at least I had a few hours sleep. That would do. I rushed around with frantic urgency, even though I had plenty of time. It would take a while for the entire crew of the Red Spark to make it to the University of Louisville Stadium. They had things to do, protocols to meet. If it was one thing I could count on, it was that the protocols of Planet Dlamius would be followed to the letter, and even Captain Bonnie wouldn't try to buck those. The house was strangely empty, except for Byron and Bosvin. "We're ready. Everybody else had somewhere to be, something to do with Fauve's work. Byron explained. I reflexively looked toward the door. All my impromptu selected equipment was where I left it. I see. I nodded. It was understandable. Did they take the car? I asked. Yeah, but don't worry. Byron jerked his thumb toward the door. I requested a rideshare van. Your budget can handle that, right? He asked with a chuckle. Right, I answered. It was true enough between the embassy and the university. In a way, I was the luckiest student ever. What student gets an unlimited budget for anything? Not many, that was for sure. If I'd pushed for it, I probably could have gotten the Earth government to chip in too if I wanted. Thanks, I said. It was still a strange word for me, but I was starting to like the sound of it. There's something to be said for acknowledging helpfulness. A horn honked outside, and through the window pane I could see a minivan pull up. No problem, Byron remarked, and with that, the three of us went to pick up all the supplies and leave the house. With the help of the guards outside, we got it all in one trip, and then we were on our way. But what we were on our way toward, I thought I knew, but the truth was I had no idea. The stadium had a virtually empty parking lot, but there were a handful of vehicles there at least. I had a vague memory of the black van near the front, and a bunch of hulking humans piling out. I will never drink again, I promised, as I recalled the hangover the following day. I still wondered if the ambassador himself remembered much about that evening. We exited the van and began hauling the boxes into the stadium. Even though either Boasson or Byron were easily large enough and strong enough, the bulk of the boxes was a bit excessive, and so we had to make 2 trips into and out of the empty stadium to make it work. Of course, when I say we, I mean they. As for myself, when I entered the wide-open stadium, I found a dozen of Byron's behemoths sitting on the bleachers with bottles of ale from a place called Stone Brewery. They were sizable bottles, but then again, these were sizable males of their species. Can you help me lay this out? I'll explain the rules while they get the rest of it, I asked, and a couple of the hulking humans got up without hesitation, though most of them moved right away. I needed only 2 or 3 to assemble the remaining boxes and place them into position just behind a white line on the field. Strangely, despite the entire world using a single standard measuring system, this one sport uses an outdated imperial method from centuries before referred to as yards. I made a mental note that if Ballyball ever did amount to anything, the measurements might have to change. I snorted at the very idea. This is just a simple teamwork study on interspecies relationship building, I reminded myself, while the humans put together the boxes we would use for the successful scoring. But as the humans continued getting the spaces lined up for use, they started to reminisce about how much fun they had with embassy security. There were nicknames thrown around about their quickly struck-up friendships, and it was then that I learned something remarkable and unexpected. They've been keeping in touch? I could hardly believe it. They met only once, and were all thoroughly drunk, I think, at least by the end. I tried to wrap my head around it, and was still trying when the greater part of embassy security walked in behind Boasson and Byron. Several minutes passed in which no work was done. The reason none was done was because the 2 groups approached and began shaking hands and chattering, shoulder slaps, back slaps, and the occasion bro hug, as I came to learn the name, were exchanged. It was undlamacin, but very human to put off work in favor of socializing, but there it was. A core trait of my people's identity was tossed aside, seemingly without noticing as soon as a handful of their favorite humans showed up. I covertly glanced at my datapad. I wanted to know how much time would be spent in socialization before they remembered we had to finish setting up. But then the X factor intervened. They didn't, I muttered, and like everyone else, I looked up toward the sky as a roar of a freighter transport rang out over the empty stadium. Most any freighter would have some small transport ships to make minor supply runs, deliver people or goods, or even serve to help a lucky few escape disaster. They were rectangular shuttles with sloped fronts and energy-based shielding in the front. I couldn't see Captain Bonnie from where I stood on ground level, but as the ship roared in and cleared the top of the stadium, I had a distinct feeling she'd be present. And she was probably steering it too. It felt wrong to make a leap like that, like I was accusing her, but I nonetheless felt as sure about that as I was sure I felt the soft ground beneath my feet. A multitude of eyes turned toward me. I didn't tell them to do that, I protested while the shuttle landed outside. It wasn't exactly quiet, and I was more than a little bit certain this would attract some unlooked-for attention. But what's a few more at this point? I'll explain it to security. As long as they don't damage anything, I don't think any laws have been broken. Still, it made my tail stiffen. Avast and have it ye. No matter the games ye landlubbers play, Captain Bonnie Red will always get her way. She shouted when she sauntered into view, while followed by 24 of her crew. They were a motley lot. Bonnie herself was dressed in something a little bit closer to modern tactical equipment, with closer-fitting leather short pants emblazoned with the skull and crossbones over her thighs, and a leather bodice with the same insignia over the middle. Her eye patch was gone, revealing 2 perfectly good eyes, and her gold earrings clinked together as she approached. At least she didn't bring her sword. I said when humans and Dlamacen security personnel both stared my way as if to say, "What is this?" Her crew wasn't that different than her, save being mostly male and shirtless, though a few wore sashes across their chests, and a few wore tricorner hats. They were not, for the most part, as large as either security team, but they were clearly lean, strong, and a few were missing fur in places that were scarred over from what could only have been Zenti cutters. As my species went, they were a fearsome-looking little lot. "I briefed me crew on the rules of your game there, lad," Captain Bonnie said, as she brushed past the security teams to approach me directly. She was a tad taller than I, and smacked her hand down hard on my shoulder. "Now where's that lass with the ball? Or at least the ball?" I was about to tell her that Fauve wasn't able to make it when we were interrupted by yet another noise. "Fight! Fight! Fight! With all our might! Fight! 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 With all our might!" I knew some of those voices. "The football team." I stopped, and my hand darted for the datapad. A higher-pitched set of far more feminine voices picked up the tempo. "By the dead gods of men! What have I done?" I exclaimed, and sought the email messages. I tapped on the one from Coach Wills and read it out loud. "Anyone who puts themselves in danger to help a little kid is worth helping out. If it would be useful, I can have the whole team show up and you can change things up a bit." I backed out of that message and tapped on Lisa's message. "I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for William's help with tutoring. If you like, I'll ask my team to come out and support you. After all, you're part of the team. But is it okay if we bring some friends just to watch?" "Laddie, hey laddie," Bonnie said, waving her hand in front of my face. "Dlamius to Bailey, you hear what I ask?" "No, sorry, what?" I asked, blinking a few times before the red-furred de la Misa spoke again. "What's with the crowd?" she asked. "How many people did you invite to this thing?" "Not this many," I admitted. "But—" I stopped when she tapped her nose several times with one finger. "Laddie, I was a scout. You might a well cut your nose off as compare it to the likes of me, savvy. I'm not barking about these here. I'm talking about them what comin' this way." I don't... What do you mean?" I asked. But before she could answer, I saw Mavis and Coach Wills walking over to me dressed like they were ready for a game. "I hope you don't mind, but the team thought the idea of an exhibition game with our alien visitors was so good that they told a few people." Mavis admitted. "Same for the cheerleading squad, actually." "I mean, do you blame them? Nobody's ever gotten to play a sport with a bunch of aliens before?" Her attempt at imitating Coach Will's stern and serious demeanor were failing rapidly. She was practically dancing. It was all going so fast, I could hear the sound of honking cars. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the cheerleaders setting up, stretching and making themselves ready for their routines, and Coach Wills addressed me. "Listen, you may be a good scientistical alien and all, but you ain't a coach. You let me look at those rules. I'll get the most out of everybody." "And what do I do?" I asked. "You write stuff down, that's your job, and course you the water boy. Keep the water coming, or'd you quit?" he asked. His heavy-set body seemed all the larger the way he asked that, and once again my attempted objection was overruled. "Hey, I like this one," Bonnie said, and looked the coach up and down. "Got spirit, he has. Give him the rules, mate. Just take your notes and let us all do the rest." I felt quite outnumbered in that moment, but the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. I could take better notes if I were standing off to one side, and Coach Wills did have team management experience that it would take me years to pick up. I handed over my datapad, and Mavis picked up the whistle dangling around her neck and blew, hard. Dlamacens winced and let out a long roo noise, adding to the brief cacophony before seeing him call everybody to him. While I went back to get the table laid out with water, I listened in while the coach began going over the rules. It was not lost on me that a handful of people began to trickle into the stands and take out their phones and other devices to start recording. This might have been a little bit much, I said to myself as I walked through the dim corridor and started filling coolers. The lack of ice was unfortunate, but I could already see Coach Wills mocking any complaints, and I wasn't going to be the cause of that. It took me almost 20 minutes to get it all ready, filling enough extra coolers that I had to grunt and strain, leaning back with all my weight to pull the cart with me back out the door and into the long corridor that would take me outside again. I turned around and leaned forward, grunting with the strain as I pulled what felt like several times my body weight in water, trying at the same time not to knock over the plastic foldable tables and disposable cups I'd need to keep filled. I was straining so hard that I must have distracted myself, because despite having better hearing than humans, I never heard the hum of the drones until I stepped out of the shadow into the light and saw them hovering above the stands like a swarm of mosquitoes and nearly as numerous.